As you probably know, it's not unusual for a weak division such as the NFC Slouch, as it's been properly dubbed by some, to give us a weak playoff team just because every divisional winner has to get in. But this team is not just getting in because of a weak division. So I'm treating this like a whodunit. I'm going to be pretty vague initially. There's going to be some things maybe that you disagree with, even, but then there's just going to be objective facts, and then I'll delve into the team in full. The precursor is that this team has a fine offense and a good defense. Pretty vague. They have an alright passing offense and the alright rushing offense as well. So pretty balanced in that regard, like they are with the overarching theme. They have great pass defense and a good run defense. So if you have a guess now, you can, put that down in the comments and adjust as needed. Where we get a lot more refined, though, is their top 10 in Super Bowl odds. So, as you could imagine, January 2nd is when I'm recording this video. It's an established team. They're not just getting in on the last week of the season, they're already in the playoffs. So, they are a theoretically legit team. And you'll see that they're theoretically even more than that. They have amazing A1 turnover production this year on defense, and they're top five in wins and point differential. So they're a bit all over the place. Top five in wins and point differential. That sounds like a really good team, right? But then you hear these more subjective things like they have just an okay offense, an okay, type of defense as well, not something outstanding. What's up with that? Well, this team is outperforming what their talent is, and I think that's coming to an absolute halt as we approach the playoffs because I think this team is going to be exposed for being more than what they should be to this point. And there's a lot of evidence of that. If you haven't been able to guess, I still realize it's not, the most defined. There's a lot of teams that could fit these criteria, especially since there's some subjectivity in there. But the team is the Jacksonville Jaguars. And they're a weird team because I think they're divisive in the sense that some people just unilaterally think the Jaguars are never good. They're kind of, Cleveland Browns ilk where, no matter what they do, everyone's going to doubt them for, just the history of not being very good in their lifetime. So there is a little bit of bias against them, but I think there's also a lot of misleading things for them. And the first gauge we get for that is I'm excluding things week 1 through 4. I think those are kind of, to be honest, kind of like preseason games at this point. In the past, it's been said that the Patriots treated the first month of the season with Belichick and Brady, that type of era, as kind of just like a feeling out process. And, if that's the best team of the era by far, that's definitely true for other teams as well. And I think it's even more so true nowadays with less involvement in preseason and less practices, or at least less intense practices leading into it. So I think there's even more feeling out for teams early on. So I'm excluding the first 4 weeks. Doesn't make too much of a difference, to be completely honest. When we look at things week 5 and on, though, where teams start to really figure things out and kind of become who they actually are, we are going to exclude the game against the Titans. That's barely an NFL team, if you can, round up to that. The Jets. And the game against the Riley Leonard Colts. So it's a little bit of a restricted sample size, I must admit. I do like larger sample sizes, and even a full sample size of an entire season is not too large. So it is a bit restricted, I will admit that, but I think it gives you a much better gauge of who the team actually is when you compare them to at least competent teams instead of the Titans, Jets, and Colts without a viable quarterback whatsoever, including the Philip Rivers Colts for perspective. So that's Rivers after a 5-year layoff being an okay quarterback. I just don't think Leonard is good enough to really get any perspective on. So when we look at these games, they beat the Rivers-led Colts by 6, Broncos by 14. That's a great win. Cardinals by 3. That and the Colts game are kind of odd. 29 against the Chargers, though. Look at that 29 versus the Chargers. They lost by 7 to the Texans. That's fine. Divisional team, good team, great defense. That's going to happen. Beat the Raiders by 1? What's up with that? The loss to the Rams was by 28. That's rough. Lost by 8 to the Seahawks, still whatever. And then they beat the Chiefs by 3. So that is a real roller coaster from week 5 onward. That's in reverse order, by the way. The Colts was the first or most recent game that was listed first. So the Jags are very all over the place. It doesn't seem like there's anything too consistent going on, and people will like to say that, well, Jakobi Meyers, is making such a big deal that you should only really evaluate them from that on. I don't think that's valid whatsoever. I think that Jakobi Meyers is a fine receiver. If that is shifting your team monumentally, that is absolutely absurd. So in that stretch of competent teams, and then even the Raiders, which I know it may seem unfair to discredit the Jets game and the Titans game because we're saying that we don't care about those teams, but when you don't play well against a bad team, that is indicative of something more so than beating a bad team. You can be a great team and not play well. That is possible, but they're not really world beaters in this entire stretch. And this is when they should be heating up, with Liam Cohen really getting his fingerprints all over the place, figuring things out. So it's really weird. That Chargers win, amazing, 29, but then the Rams lost by 28. That, kind of cancels it out. And then everything else from there is just like, one score games. They're winning some, they're losing some. They get a 6-3 record. That is good. Not an amazing strength of schedule by any stretch, but 6-3 is good. But they're plus 13. So they're winning by a point on average in that stretch. So not margin of victory wise, I'm saying point differential. So that is very alarming to me because they don't have this baseline of play to where you can kind of brush over mediocre play. It, is then going to be skewed by, those couple blowouts they'll get against like the Titans and the Jets where, good for you, you beat them by a lot just like every other team in the league. So, when you look at these real games, you start getting a little nervous, I feel, especially because it's not, like the Chiefs of last year where they were winning lots of fluky games, as I, predicted. They were fraudulent. And, at least they had that baseline of being a Super Bowl team through the years. The Jags are not that. They rarely even make the playoffs with this kind of iteration of, team parts. So it's hard to give them the benefit of the doubt, and they're not giving us reason to feel too good. Beyond that, there is a lot of tangible things that are well established through the years, but also through this year as well, that are very worrying for me. Chiefly, Trevor Lawrence. I know. Also, real quick, speaking of the Chiefs, I called them being frauds this year as well, so I think that aged pretty well. But regardless, back to the Jags. Trevor Lawrence, we're in year 5. You have pretty much 4.5 years of game, or actually over that, because it was only 10 games he played in. I think it was like year 3 or something for him, but that's pretty much the only time he missed was those 6 games. So he's played pretty much entirety of 5 years at this point. We have a large sample size on him. Yes, we're going to weight the stuff with Cohen more heavily, but it's not like he's been in a Sam Darnold Jets situation where there's just nothing at all. There's always been some stuff on the team and some level of competency with coaching aside from the Urban Meyer stint. So we can't just be writing excuses the entire way. We have to evaluate him in that sample size to some degree. And even when we look at him this year, he's a plus 10 in expected points added per dropback. That is whatever. That's tied for 16th in the league. I feel fine with using per dropback because he's not really adding thing through the ground. He's a plus 1 EPA through rushing, so that is totally whatever, not much of anything, especially too because it's on a small sample size. He's not running a lot, so it's not really even too indicative through that. But that gives you an idea. The mediocre dropback efficiency, and the average before that in that roughly 4 years was a plus 5. So plus 10 is double plus 5 if you're not a math whiz. And plus 10 had us at the 16th best, so he has not been good through the years. It's like an overarching theme, and that's shown through other stats as well. EPA is a great stat, does give you a great gauge of how productive the player is being, but it is going to be skewed by team some, so it's not the be-all end-all. But this year alone, out of 26 quarterbacks that have taken 50% or more of snaps per PFF, Lawrence is 19th in turnover-worthy plays. So certified bottom 10? That's rough. He's 20th out of 26 in adjusted completion percentage, which is looking at his accuracy where the ball is placed. That's rough. And he's about middle of the road in time to throw with 16 out of 26. So not too much of anything there, a little slower maybe than you'd like to see, but they do some long developing stuff, and he can extend the play a little bit, so it's not too much of anything, especially because it's not, like a 5-second time to throw like a Justin Fields would have. So that's not a great endorsement any which way across a bevy of things, and the time to throw is a little bit wonky because the middling support in conjunction with that makes things very liable to go south quickly for teams that have a good pass rush and can get some type of pressure in, be it through blitzing as well, because he's not processing at an uber quick rate. But they're 11th in pass blocking according to PFF, so that's good, but we're talking middle of the road type of pass blocking, and then slow time to throw, and then 14th in rushing expected points added. So they're going to be in some passing situations for sure. They're not getting too consistent of rushing support, even though Travis Etienne had that like 7,000 point fantasy outing this year. But yeah, there's not a whole lot of stuff there that is in defense of them for teams that can generate pressure. So I think the Texans in particular, say, if that would be a matchup, would be very grueling for the Jaguars to play. And yeah, they lost by 7 the most recent game. It's not like they got pounded or anything, but projecting forward, I think that is a bad option. Denver with a pass rush. So there are lots of teams, in that realm, lots of good teams with good pass rushes, and you're seeing lots of those in the playoffs. So matchup wise too, that's pretty rough over the additional part of just their general talent. I don't think is too substantial. When we look at the general talent, I think for relevant positions, meaning I'm not including linebacker really. It's just not a needle mover. Rather, it would be nice if I could talk. I think the best thing for them is their defensive back unit as a whole, which is a great thing to have as a strength, no doubt. You have good defensive backs in Jarrian Jones, Montaric Brown, Jordan Lewis, Antonio Johnson. That's a really good 4 situation there. But then you have Greg Newsome. If only they had somebody like Tyson Campbell, say, instead of Greg Newsome. If only they could have had, a way to have him. Oh, wait. So that is a good strength, but is that like anything you really are, praising too substantially? For me, it's not. Like, I don't even have to think twice about it. especially too because there can be a little bit of overlap between Jarrian Jones and Jordan Lewis, where Lewis is playing safety now. He's been a nickel in the past, so it's not like the biggest conversion, but there is some wonky stuff there. You have two most ideally nickel guys as two of your better defensive backs, so that's kind of weird. And then again, Newsome is actually a weakness, and he has been as well last year. So it's not just like a getting acclimated this year with a new team and such situation. He just hasn't been good recently. So you have a weakness in the defensive back situation, which is a weak link situation where you're only as good as your weakest player, because if everybody plays perfect coverage but that Greg Newsome matchup gets torched, it doesn't matter at all. The quarterback's just going to go to him over and over and over again. So that being the biggest strength for them as far as like real meaningful things is alarming. They do have the best linebacker duo in the league. I will give them credit for that, at least to my, belief they do. Devin Lloyd, amazing. Oluokun is always steady as just kind of a do-it-all linebacker with no real weakness. The other thing you could mention as potentially being their best thing is just their defensive line overarchingly, which is good, but again, it's not elite by any measure. They have good pass rush success. Josh Hines-Allen, 12th in pass rush productivity. Eric Armstead, 15th. You got a nice edge interior combo there then, but it's not, earth-shattering by any stretch. Neither are just completely dominating the play game in, game out. And then Trayvon Walker wraps it up nicely for the defensive line with 35th in pass rush productivity. So you have three good pass rushers, two really good, one that's low-end good. That's a good line. That's not something that is really going to terrify offenses, though. So the fact that, again, that's what you're talking about with your strengths, you need to have basically no weaknesses whatsoever at that point to really get yourself in the mix, and that is not them whatsoever. They have pretty glaring weaknesses, I would say, at very important parts beyond quarterback, where you can do mental gymnastics to be like, well, Trevor Lawrence in the past 3 games against whatever teams, like, he looks so and so with Liam Cohen, and that's all that really matters. You can do some stuff to be like, well, this most recent sample size of Lawrence is good, so it's not a weakness. I tend to think the overarching performance suggests he is a weakness, honestly, because especially this year, he's just good, not amazing, and there's lots of things to poke holes in with him. So to have then a very real weakness being the passing game with Lawrence, if he's on, the receivers are still going to be making things difficult. When we look at yards per route run, drop percentage, and contested catch targets, there is a pretty terrifying trend here where, Parker Washington, 18th in yards per route run, very good. You like that. That's a legit number 1 level thing. But part of why he's that high is just they have to throw somewhere. And with Brian Thomas Jr. being 5th worst with drop percentage, that's going to not always be too productive. So Parker Washington's making a lot of, feeding that way. So 18th, still good, not, again, earth-shattering, but that's good. 21st in drop percent, so that's, not great, but, whatever. 21st in contested catch, that's okay. That's a lot of contested catches. That also adds to the volatility with the Jaguars, which, in their case, since I do think they're going to be the inferior team in most matchups in the playoffs, you do want volatility, so maybe they get the, kind of good dice roll RNG situation where they do end up, just making all the contested catches, but are you going to sustain that over a playoff run? I don't think so. So, it's good for Washington. It's not amazing. Jacoby Myers, 42nd in yards per route run. That's fine. Drop percentage, he's 63rd worst, so that's very good. He's got reliable hands, but 26 in contested catch targets as well. That's a lot of contested catches. Are we, you know, going to feel good about that? Especially when, Brian Thomas, the most talented of these guys, seemingly still can't catch. And, you know, 55th in yards per out run, how is that the most talented? Last year does matter. But, the hand injury, I think it's a thumb situation. Drop percentage, he's fifth worst in the NFL. That is really rough when that is a guy that is a key feature part of the offense. 14th in contested catch targets as well. So all these guys are, again, just getting contested catch after contested catch opportunity. They're not getting anything easy. Lawrence is adding to that by being erratic with spraying passes. So this just seems like a recipe for disaster for me. They don't have very clear, substantial, defined strengths. They have very legitimate weaknesses. And, they're just kind of whatever across the board. I feel like when you actually look at things in a realistic sense. So this team to me is not a threat whatsoever to win the Super Bowl. Maybe that's too lofty of expectations, but we are talking about a team that is, I think they're like 8th in Super Bowl odds, so they're in the mix for sure. And, they've been vying for the number one seed in the AFC. The AFC is weak, so that's one thing they have going for them. But, the AFC is weak for every AFC team. It's not just weak for the Jaguars. So they're not uniquely set up to benefit from the AFC not having a lot of dominant top teams. The Jaguars are, kind of par for the course in that sense then, where they're a good team, yeah. But most years, this is like a 6th seed, to be completely honest. And, they're kind of being built up as a lot more than that, according to a lot of different people. And I think there's so much wrong with them and so little that makes you feel good if you're being realistic. Some of the big key things with them to wrap it up: 15th in passing expected points added, 14th in rushing expected points added, 10th in run defense EPA. I believe they are like 6th in passing EPA, so that does kind of throw a curveball in things a little bit. That is at least a strength, but a lot of that is they've been lucky with turnover generation. This defense is not really worthy of generating a ton of turnovers. They don't have a dominant pass rush that makes, problems for the quarterbacks. They're not super sticky in coverage to where everything is contested and liable to be picked off. It's just, things have gone their way. So I think this is a super easy fraud to detect. I don't think there's, again, any threat of them winning the Super Bowl. I think more than likely they're out by the divisional round. So I think they are definitely a fraud. They're a pretender, not a contender. Those are my thoughts on the Jaguars. Be sure to let me know what yours are in the comment section. Also, be sure to like the video if you liked the video. And subscribe for more NFL content. Going to be doing college football playoff content. And after that, it's going to be NBA season in addition to NFL off season and so on. So, got a lot of content coming. Be sure to subscribe for that. Also, be sure to treat yourself like a friend. And thank you for watching.